welcome to the Unreleased, the Design Research Podcast. This podcast exists to help map, broadcast, and promote design research worldwide. The Unreleased podcast is brought to you by IADE, Universidade Europeia, and UNIDCOM. To know more, visit unreleased.unidcom-IADE.pt. That's .unidcom-IADE.pt. In this interview, Emília Duarte talks to Sucharita Beniwal, a textile designer and design researcher whose work explores creativity in resource-constrained and marginalized communities. After a decade in textile industry, she transitioned into academia through social design, focusing on ethnographic and field-based research. Her current research investigates repair practices, informal economies, and embodied knowledge in making. She teaches critically reflective courses that challenge students to engage ethically with cultural heritage and indigenous practices. In this episode, Sucharita shares her journey from textile design to social design research, exploring creativity in resource-constrained communities. She discusses her work on repair practices, informal economies, and embodied knowledge in making. Her teaching challenged students to critically engage with cultural heritage and positionality. The conversation highlights the importance of values, co-design, and the ethical engagement with marginalized communities.
Here are people who cannot afford design, but they're creating a designed object.
Here is Emília and Sucharita.
Hello, Sucharita. Thank you for joining us here and be here with us at the Unreleased Design Research Podcast. We are here today in the context of education, design research for education. But before we start talking about that, I guess that is an interesting topic for you. But before we start on that, I would ask you to tell us a little bit about you, your research interests, your path, just to let us know a little bit more about you, please.
Hi, I'm a textile designer by training. However, I worked for 10 years in the textile industry, and towards the end of it, I was doing fieldwork-based ethnography in Arunachal Pradesh, which is the extreme east border of India. And while working with documenting people there and their textile traditions, constantly as an outsider, I was asked, why are you documenting us? And the colonial aspect of ethnographic research and anthropology started hitting me. But I still hadn't found what I want to do with this unrest that had started inside me. And just around that time, I got to work with a paint company which was trying to find the Indian perception of color. And I was working under a doctorate who had worked under under the Chilean, I'm slipping his name, she had done her postdoc on autopoiesis, the person who talked about autopoiesis, I can't remember his name suddenly, sorry. And in that whole relativist understanding of the world, I also realized I had not learned how to question critically my own position, how to research the other, how to not just be descriptive and add adjectives when I'm writing about others, but actually just be a little more factual. And just at that point, India was starting the first social design program. There was a university called the Ambedkar University in Delhi, and I went and enrolled myself there. It was a big thing because I was working before that, and you're almost reaching mid-career, and you decide to go to studies after 10 years of working, and in a new program, which was slightly flexible, which was the good thing about it. It was long, but it was a 3-year master's, and I took classes in healthcare, in maternity, traditional maternity, and birthing systems. I worked with Public Health Foundation of India, I went and did internship because I wanted to see how healthcare is delivered at the extreme poverty end of India. And some of those experiences were slightly shattering. And then I worked finally for my thesis because I started missing textiles by then in a very unknown kind of space, because I worked in the market of fruits and vegetables. But I found an object which was used to transfer things, which had some semblance of being textile in nature because it was made from jute gunny bags. And somewhere there, I realized that there's this whole world of other people being designers. Here are people who cannot afford design, but they're creating a designed object, extremely well thought of and manufactured, both in techniques of textiles and ergonomics. And we will never call them designers because they are poor people who are using this, scavenging this material from their direct context, using their known knowledge and making this thing. So that became my thesis project, and that writing about it got me into the field of academia. After my master's, I still went on to do a research project of documentation of textiles, but at that I went to my own people, and I still have a pending part, like there's a favorite project that I still have to do of a tribe which follows transhumans, and they're migratory, they move down in summer, they move up in summer and move down in winter, but that's something I want to do at later points.
Okay, and so can you just give us a little bit more information on the topics you love to explore, you love to do research about? So just for us to understand a little bit your research interests.
I'm very often interested in how people respond to situations, to contextual situations with material responses from their own environment, where you have to be frugal and you have to be extremely resource sensitive and skill sensitive, because neither can you afford the materiality, nor do you have access to skills other than what you know in your own hands, and what kind of design forms there. So now I've moved that nature of study, which started in my master's, to the idea of repair, and my present research is on street repairers. So in India, we have cobblers who repair your shoes, because shoe is a very valuable commodity, especially when it was leather. Today, of course, you can, with fast fashion, you can buy and throw shoes, but there's still people who will get their shoes repaired. And so you can find cobblers. And similarly, in smaller cities, not in the big cities anymore, but in the poorer parts of big cities also, you can find tailors who will repair for you. Now, repair was within the home, so it was a woman's task, mending and repair, and how there is a in the public space, right on the street, without a roof. How do they manage in winters? How do they manage in rain? How do they manage in summer? What happens when they go home for 2 months of festivity? So that's the space I'm doing my research right now on.
Okay.
And similarly, there's a full production line for fast fashion, which exists in the older parts of many cities. I knew it in Delhi when I was in the export industry, and now I've found the similar thing in Ahmedabad, which has a huge manufacturing hub for retail. Delhi, it was for exports. In Ahmedabad, it's for the retail chain. So we have fast fashion chains which are homegrown, and how tailors exist and what is the line of where the raw material is coming, who's cutting, who's stitching. So there's a whole aspect of livelihood there which I'm looking at. And this is really unfair production in some ways. These are sweatshops in some ways. But no one's questioning it, because everyone wants new clothes very fast now.
Yeah.
And they're equally happy to discard them. So there's this space which I'm trying to look at. My new research question in this area is still forming, because I have students who are very happy to go to the second-hand market and buy clothes for really cheap.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, when they start their own brands, they want to sell clothes for so expensive. So I'm trying to figure out a way around these questions while I'm questioning them. Why are you buying for 100 rupees when you want to send for 10,000 rupees? That space I'm still exploring.
Okay, fantastic. Now that you mentioned your students and as I mentioned before, we are here in the context of research for design education. How do you approach these topics with the students? What kind of pedagogical approaches or methods, or how do you deal with this in an academic and pedagogical sense?
I'm known to be provocative in my class.
Okay.
And there are three courses that I teach which deal with critical thought. One is documentation of traditional Indian textiles. One is history of Indian textiles, and another is documentation of indigenous practices. Most of this is about studying cultural heritage and how I bring these questions to my classroom. I talk a lot about the position of privilege that I as a designer and my students in the future occupy when we are studying others or we are studying anything, and how very often when we are in this position of power, we assume and we bring in our biases when we are studying. So there is this, and history changes according to who's reading it and who's writing it. Similarly, when we are studying crafts and making processes, because we come with a certain bias about making and materiality, very often we don't observe how it's actually being made. So those are things I caution my students with. Indigenous practices and its documentation was a course I started for my school, and it was with a discipline other than textiles. It was for product designers. And the first questions they started raising was, why do we have to do this? And why is a textile design faculty teaching us this course? There's something wrong with the curricula. So it was very challenging to convince them. But by making them look at value systems, which I took them, again, a little behind in the past, like I made them look at whole world catalog. I made them look at the forces of pandemic and what it has done to us in certain practices, and the advantages of value systems that existed. Like in a lot of times, designers are appropriating things that already exist, like passive cooling. It has been there. So I make them see, like, you need to see that there are ways of being in this planet which are more sensitive, less invasive in that situation and context. And as product designers, you need to have some values. So if you don't work around values, how will you create design that lasts for longer? Like, it has to be embedded in the community which you're starting work with. And in my textile students, when I do this traditional Indian textiles and history of textile documentation, I go on to teach them a design project where they have to take a craft heritage and interpret it for today's world. So then the question comes that you studied this heritage, but now how do you keep it alive? In its essence, you're an outsider. Here's a community which may be doing this block printing for 500 years. You are English educated, market oriented, amazing person. But here is something amazing that lasted without you 500 years. Now, if you have to do a change, what would you change? And what would be the least change where you do not disrupt their life, but yet bring them something meaningful? And do you want to change? Maybe you don't want to change, but in textiles, not only the market, even the makers want new things. But then what could be, like, how do you understand and decode the essence of that craft, the values of that craft, and and those are non-negotiables. You do not do anything to them, and then you design around it. So those are the ways in which
you approach
in my classroom I bring in these questions.
But you mentioned that they consider you or see you as a provocative. So I'm wondering what kind of challenges you face. So is there some reactions or criticism? I don't know. What kind of challenge you face more often?
So I use the word provocative especially because my course in indigenous practices documentation faced a lot of challenge constantly from these students in product design, because they want to make the next Tesla, they want to fly the next NASA craft, they want to design the next Apple phone, they want to be in some fancy place somewhere. And here's a course which is compulsory field work for 15 days. They have to go to a local context around their house where they can understand a local language and be there and just be there. And they can't document just a process and come back. That I documented how to make a violin. No. I want you to document the tacit knowledge is there. When someone is making a violin, where does the thought begin? What is the materiality of the violin? If it is wood, which wood? How old was the wood? Where did the wood come from? I don't want to know how the violin was made. That you can do. I'm happy if you do that also. But follow the wood. Which forest did it come from? When did it grow? Who identified that this is the wood to cut it? So those kind of knowledges which is held in elders, how do you understand those? And when you're trying to understand those, what values were the elders passing without saying to the next generation? And how do you read this? So it's very difficult for them sometimes to see meaning in this kind of study. So they become a little, so then they're like, oh, why is she provoking us? Okay. And in history, I do the same, because I keep saying, this is one history and it's not the only history. And your basic premise is not to change unless it comes from them. So how do you do co-designing workshops? So some of them makes it, I wouldn't say they wouldn't use the word provocative. I like to think I'm provocative, but it makes them uncomfortable. For some people who want, tell us what to do and we'll do it, they are like, why is she making us write our positionality? Why is she making us write what is the essence in words, articulate in pictures? Okay. So they find it a little painful. They're like, why can't we just do drawings and design?
Do you think design school, at least from your experience, they are prepared to engage on this kind of approaches, or you see yourself as I don't know, working in the edge of the system, or do you think, in other words, do you think there's a space for design school to transform in something else?
I think my school, because it comes from a lineage of being on the other side, like thankfully I'm in India, and the fact that very early on our faculty realized, and the mandate was to design for India, and people understood that we have to design like rural India is the larger volume of India, and they introduced these courses like environmental perception, which is also one of the courses that I anchored for many years, and I also go on field to teach. And with the first year, these students are only 6 months into the school and we take them to field just to be there. It's just slow observation. You are not going to design anything, just learn from the environment. So I think our teachers had created this space at NID where someone can go ahead and work for Samsung or make the next iPhone, or they make the next Mahindra, which is designed by an NIDian. But at the same time, there can be someone who studied ceramic at NID and says, you know what, I want to work in social communication in rural Rajasthan, and I will go and work with women who are unable to survive birthing there. And it had this space to ask difficult questions. I think my school, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to decide where you want to be, and people get space, and I think people find space. There's also a school there are also people in my school who are only looking at speculative design futuring, what is Abbey and Dunn doing, what is happening in UK, what is happening in the US, and there's space for that too. But there's also space to look at, hey, what is happening in Colombia, what is happening in Chile, how are we informed by indigenous practices from Australia. So there are people who can talk, like you can talk all these languages. So that way the school it's a great place to be, where each one of us as faculties have our own ways of looking at the world, and it allows that. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And one of my questions is that how does the results of this research returns to the community? How do you transfer your efforts into something that is really useful and that helps the community also to benefit from all that knowledge that they offer you? How do you transfer?
So in textile design, mostly whenever we do a project on designing with that particular cultural heritage or craft, it's usually co-designed. So the designed artifacts, products remain with the community. Because for them it becomes a new lifeline to try new things. And that's one of the reasons they're happy to work with our students, because they know some meaning of new life will come.
So do you work with this social entrepreneurship and this kind of NGOs, or how do you transfer?
Somehow.
Is it direct?
It's almost direct in most, but one of my colleagues does it through an NGO. I have another colleague who does this, she does it through an NGO, but for my course, I make the students identify on their capabilities and from their region, because if we are in India, we have so many regions, and if you can identify from your location, because tomorrow you might want to start a brand from there, so you need to build up your resources. In the product design course of indigenous practices, sometimes they go back and share the documentation, sometimes they don't. So there is this, like sometimes they have not gone back and shared, but they make a video, they make booklets, and they leave it with them. But sometimes the community wants something else. They want sketches of themselves. They're not interested. Okay, you want to hang out with us, you want to learn about us, fine, but you do sketches for us, and we are okay with that. So the give and take, or leaving it back, what we learn from them is not always clearly communicated backwards in the non-product develop, where there is only documentation.
Yeah, because there's, how can I say this, some tricky aspects on these trades. Why? Because sometimes designers go to the communities, they appropriate the knowledge and they get inspired by them, and they kind of steal.
Yes.
I'm not, suggest this, but can be kind of
it can
unfair appropriation.
Yeah.
And so they can just steal that knowledge and that even that statics or something, and do not return anything to the community. So is this a concern for you?
Yeah, it is a concern, and that is why, at least in the documentation courses, I tell them we are not designing anything here.
I see.
The entire code is to learn values. So one of my students, with great difficulty, she wanted to document making of a leather slipper, the one that became famous now with the whole Prada scandal. And I said, no, you can't document making of the slipper. Go back to the processing of the leather. and natural leather processing is extremely tough, and it's also a process done over many days out in the open, and it has these smells, it has all these things which she had to deal with. But when the student came back, she says, she didn't say it then, she said it much later though, in the coursework she just presented. She said, I was transformed because here was a system which was so circular in its nature that they didn't waste anything. They didn't even waste the straw that they had. And she said, whenever I want to design now, whether it's systems for making, when I'm designing a digital product, or they have something called technically complex products, I want to remember the circularity of what is getting disposed in this, what can be repaired. And I think I've noticed that pattern in certain students who do that course with me. So the values stay with them. So there, I think there's no appropriation because you're not taking a craft. The dangerous part can happen in textiles, but there I'm very clear that you have to leave the design with them. You cannot the making is with them, the design is with them. And as textile designers, you cannot execute the artifact without them.
I see.
So you leave some design methods with them, make it transparent how you thought of the design, how did you change, if you've changed a border, why did you change a border? How did you come to that? Or you do it with them, otherwise don't design them.
Don't design it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm really enjoying our conversation, but our time is running out. Just one very last question. So many of our listeners are starting their PhD path or about to start, or they are considering to start soon. And so we use this time with our guests to inspire them and to offer, new topics that never crossed their minds, or emergent topics, or hot topics, as you prefer, as a inspirational source, as I said before. So, can you just share some of these ideas or these topics that you consider fundamental or relevant to suggest to
So,
our
as
listeners?
designers, I think there's a huge gap in looking at design on the margins because of the huge vulnerabilities that exist in resource crunched societies. There's creativity at the margins, which is unacknowledged, misunderstood, and not looked at. So there's this huge space that I feel, and they need power, they need help to be recognized as creative forces. That part we can bring. The design part they have, the creative part they have. There's also this aspect of doing long, multi-year, multi-temporal, multidisciplinary projects, which I find interesting, especially say in a community space where there are different kinds of sensibilities that come together. So that's a space where I feel, but for a single person doing PhD research, it doesn't work, but for projects, it works very well. So I did a project in the tailor part for the production. I had furniture designers, textile designers working together, because it was not just about how little they earn in production, but also what kind of spaces they work in, and where can design without creating new materialities. From the materialities of that community, create new design. So spaces where design enters without being expensive and without being so visible that you make them feel like, oh, we can't do anything because we don't have design, or we don't have the purchasing power for design. And the one space which I really think people, especially because we're becoming so digital, should be looking at in most spaces is the embodied knowledge of making. So I find there's so much in making, whether it's making of food, whether it's sewing of your repaired of your, or whether it's gardening. There's this whole aspect of making, which I think is a huge space to look at. And then if you can look at embodied making within communities, there's this whole world which we can learn from, where relationality is not just between human and human, it's between the thing that is made, the environment which is allowing that making, which is so much that design can learn from, and it's open-ended, and nobody's, like, people are, but there's a huge possibility
opportunities
there.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so I'm just going to thank you once again for being here with us, and I wish you tremendous success, and that you continue to inspire your students and be an important voice in your community and in your society. So we lack on people like you that are, I don't know if I can say it, but at least you try to become a model that others can follow. And so I thank you.
Thank you,
for that.
Emilia.
Thank you so much.
You are a model.
No,
that
I'm not.
I'm looking forward to hearing more from you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
If you like what you heard today, please subscribe to our podcast on the main platform. For more information about the Unreleased podcast, go to unreleased.unidcom-IADE.pt. There, you can find all the episodes and more information about our guests. Unreleased podcast is the result of the work of the Students of Design Culture and Practices course from the PhD in Design program of IADE, Universidade Europeia. It's produced and edited by UNIDCOM.